My husband left me for a dream that seemed bigger than our marriage. Within weeks, he boarded a flight to the United States, believing he would find the perfect life, while I stayed in Dehradun trying to understand how a person I loved could erase me from his own plans. I spent years rebuilding my life in silence, dealing with loneliness, humiliation, and the feeling of having been abandoned by someone who had promised to stay. What I never imagined was that, years later, he would come back carrying truths he never had the courage to tell, and a regret that arrived too late. This is not just a story about immigration or marriage. It is about the price of chasing a dream, and about the strength of the one who stays behind to pick up the pieces when everything falls apart. I still remember the smell of the chai that was boiling when he told me he was leaving. It wasn't a fight. There was no shouting. It was worse than that. It was calm. He sat on our bed, the bed my mother had helped choose when we got married, and spoke as if he were explaining a utility bill to me. He said he had gotten the visa. He said a friend from Delhi knew someone in New Jersey who could arrange work. He said he was going to the United States. I asked when. He said, in 3 weeks. I stood there with the chai cup in my hand, the steam rising in the cold Dehradun air, and I couldn't say a word. There was a silence that hurts differently. Not the silence of when you have nothing to say. The silence of when you have so much to say that everything locks up inside you. I was 30 years old at the time. Arvind was 31. We had 5 years of marriage, a rented apartment in the Rajpur Road neighborhood, and a routine I thought was our life. I woke up early, made his tiffin, worked part-time at a private school teaching English to children, came home, cooked. He worked at a small IT company that paid poorly and delayed salaries every time something went wrong. We weren't rich, but we weren't going hungry either. But Arvind never wanted to just not go hungry. I had known that from the beginning. He was always the kind of man who looks at the neighbor and feels like he's falling behind, who compares, who calculates, who falls asleep and wakes up thinking about how much time is left to reach somewhere better. I married that man. I loved that man with all that restlessness inside him. What I didn't know was that, in his calculation, I wouldn't fit into that journey. In the days that followed, life went on as if nothing had happened. He went to work. I went to teach. We had dinner together. But something had shifted in the air inside the house, a lightness in him that left my stomach heavy. Because when you love someone, you learn to read that person's body, and Arvind's body was light. It was relieved. I was raised in Dehradun. My family is from here, roots planted in this mountain city that is not Delhi, not Bombay, but has a calm I always thought was enough. My father worked his whole life in a government office. My mother sewed at home to help out. We didn't have much, but what we had was ours. I learned early that stability is a gift, not a prison. Arvind never understood that. He came from a slightly more ambitious family. A businessman father, a cousin who had gone to Bangalore and prospered, another cousin in Dubai. Arvind grew up looking at those men as if they were proof that it was possible, and I think in some way, he also grew up looking at Dehradun as if it were something holding him back. I didn't know that. At some point, he had started looking at me that way too. It was in the second week that he told me the rest. We were on the balcony. It was night. The city lights below looked peaceful, those lights I have known since childhood, and he said he thought it would be better for us to end the marriage before he left. I listened carefully. I asked him to repeat it. He repeated it. He said it didn't make sense for me to keep waiting, that he didn't know how long he would stay, that life there was different, that it could take years to get settled. He said it was more honest this way, that it freed me, that it was the right thing to do. I didn't cry in front of him. I don't know where that strength came from, but I didn't cry. I stood looking at the city lights and thought, so that's what this was. It wasn't a departure, it was an exit. He wasn't going toward a better life. He was leaving me. Arvind's family knew before mine did. I found that out later, when my mother-in-law called with a voice that tried to be kind, but was just embarrassed. She said her son had always been like that, such a dreamer, that I should understand, that maybe things would work themselves out later. She spoke as if I were a situation to be managed. I hung up the phone, went to the bathroom, turned on the tap, and cried with the water running so no one could hear. Telling my family was the hardest part. My mother went quiet the way she does when she is holding something big. My father turned red but said nothing. My younger sister Dia was the only one who said something useful. She said, "You didn't do anything wrong. You know that, right?" I said I knew, but honestly, I didn't know. For weeks I turned everything over in my mind, trying to find the mistake I had made. Had I fought too much? Too little? Had I asked for too much? Had I been too small for the dream he wanted? When someone leaves like that, We don't look for the guilty party out there. We start looking inside. He left on a Thursday in September. I didn't go to the airport. It wouldn't have made sense. We had signed the papers, or at least started the process. In India, these things take time, but the decision had been made. The marriage had ended long before any signature. That night, I made dinner just for myself for the first time in 5 years. Rice, dal, and eggplant seasoned the way only I like it. I sat alone at the table that was too large for one person, ate slowly, washed the dishes. Nobody prepares you for how ordinary grief is, how it has no background music, no dramatic lighting, how it shows up precisely when you are washing a plate, folding laundry, waiting for the bus. I cried washing that plate, not out of anger, not out of missing him yet. I cried because I realized I had loved that man with everything I had, and that it hadn't been enough to make him stay, and that maybe it never could have been. In the months that followed, I kept living. Not in a pretty way, not in the kind of way that looks like a redemption story. I kept living in the messy, exhausting way that it actually is. I kept teaching. I started taking on more classes to have something to occupy my mind. My mother called every day with that worried mother's voice, and I told her I was fine in the same tone every time, until she started to believe it. My mother-in-law disappeared. His family disappeared. As if, when he left, I had become a person who no longer existed on their map. I learned something about separation that nobody talks about. You don't just lose the husband. You lose the entire life you had built around him. You lose the plans. You lose the dreams that were meant for two. You even lose the silly arguments that, looking back from a distance, felt like intimacy. I was 30 years old and starting over from scratch in a life I hadn't asked to restart. But I was on my feet. And that, I discovered later, was more than many people expected of me. The first winter after he left was the longest of my life, not because the cold in Dehradun was any different. The city has always been like this in December, that dry mountain cold that comes in through the poorly closed window and stays. But there is a difference between feeling cold with someone on the other side of the bed and feeling cold alone. I didn't know that difference until it arrived. I slept in the middle of the bed. I don't know why I started doing that. I think it was my body's way of occupying the space it used to share, as if I needed to prove to myself that this bed was mine now, that I fit in it whole. The classes saved me in a way I hadn't expected. There was an early morning class, children of 8 and 9 years old learning basic English. They knew nothing about my life. To them, I was just Teacher Mayer, the one who explained things clearly and didn't shout. I walked into that classroom and became someone else, a person who had answers, a person who knew what she was doing. Outside that classroom, I knew nothing. It was in February that Arvin messaged me for the first time. Just 2 lines. He said he had arrived safely, that he was working, that he hoped I was well too. The kind of message that doesn't ask for a reply, but sits there waiting for one. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I put the phone in my bag and went to make dinner. I didn't reply that night, or the next. I replied 3 days later, with just 1 line. I said I was fine. Because I was. Or at least I was trying to be, which in practice was almost the same thing. He took a week to reply. He said he was living with 4 other Indians in an apartment in Newark, that the job was at a small tech company, that the English there was different from what he had expected, that people spoke too fast. He said it was cold. Newark in February. I didn't even need to imagine. I didn't feel sorry for him. Or I did, but I tucked it away so quickly I barely noticed. Because I had learned that feeling sorry for someone who chose to leave is a trap. You start feeling sorry, then you start wanting to help, then you start waiting, and suddenly you're back at the beginning without having even noticed the path you walked. I couldn't walk that path back. My mother started talking about a new marriage about 4 months later. She didn't say it directly. She said it in that Indian mother way, which is a way that looks like conversation but is pressure wrapped in the packaging of care. She would mention the neighbor's daughter who had separated and then remarried and was doing very well now. She would ask if I remembered the son of my father's friend, the one who worked in Chandigarh. She would leave the subject hanging in the air and wait. I pretended not to understand. Not because I didn't want to move forward. It was more that I was still in the middle of something that hadn't finished hurting. And the idea of starting another relationship while I still woke up some mornings with a heaviness in my chest felt dishonest. To myself, mostly. Dia understood that. My younger sister always understood the things I couldn't quite explain. She would call, and sometimes we would just sit in silence, just breathing on the phone, and that was enough. It was around the middle of that year that the messages with Arvin became more frequent. I'm not sure exactly how it happened. It started with him sending a photo of Indian food he had bought at an immigrant market in Jersey City. then a photo of snow in a park, then a 2-minute voice note telling me he had tried to make dal, and it had been a disaster. I laughed at that voice note, the kind of laugh that comes out without warning, and then I felt worried about myself for having laughed. Because there is a very fine line between maintaining civil contact with someone who used to be your husband and beginning to reconnect in a way that leads nowhere good. I knew where that line was. But when you spend months without anyone who truly knows you to talk to, any familiarity carries a different weight. I didn't let the conversation grow too much. I replied sparingly. I took my time. I didn't ask about his life beyond what was necessary, but I listened to the voice notes. Things had improved a little at work. The school had offered me more hours, and I had accepted without thinking twice. I went in early in the morning and came home after dark. Had dinner, showered, slept, woke up and repeated. There were days I spent 12, 13 hours outside the house and came home so tired there was no room left to think about anything else. Maybe that was the point. A colleague at work, Sunita, had tried to include me in some outings. Dinner with friends, a festival here, a birthday party there. I went sometimes. I stayed 2 hours, talked, smiled at the right moments, and came home feeling lonelier than before I had left. Because there is a loneliness that doesn't go away with company. You can be at a table full of people and it stays right there beside you, quiet, waiting for you to come home. That was my loneliness back then. It was at the end of that year that I met Rohan. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't that thing of looking at someone and just knowing. It was much more ordinary than that, which is exactly how real things tend to happen. He was the brother of one of Sunita's friends. He had shown up at a dinner I had gone to because Sunita had insisted so much that it became hard to make up an excuse. He sat on the other side of the table, ate quietly, left before the end. I barely paid attention. But the following week, Sunita told me he had asked about me. I didn't make much of it. I told her he seemed nice, but that I wasn't at any point in my life for that. Sunita said that was fine, that she had only mentioned it because she thought I deserved to know. Just that. But something stayed. Rohan Mehra, 32 years old from Dehradun itself, worked at an engineering company in Haridwar, and came back to the city on weekends. Quiet, straightforward, the kind of person who speaks because they have something to say. We started talking on the phone after Sunita arranged the contact in a way that felt inevitable. The first conversation was about work, about the city, about nothing important. He didn't try to impress me. He didn't force jokes. He didn't ask anything too personal too soon. That calm of his surprised me. I had forgotten that a man could be like that. With Arvind, things had cooled down. The messages became more sparse. He seemed busy. Or maybe he had sensed that I was putting distance between us. Or perhaps both things at the same time. One night he sent a longer voice note. He talked about how difficult the work had become, that his visa had run into problems, that he was paying an immigration lawyer who charged a lot and promised everything and delivered little, that his apartment mates were complicated, that the loneliness there was a kind he hadn't imagined. I listened to all of it, and then I did something I had never done before. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because I realized, listening to that voice note, that he was reaching out to me as a safe harbor, and I could no longer be that for him, because as long as I was being a safe harbor for someone who had left me, I wasn't building anything for myself. I put the phone down. I opened the bedroom window, looked out at the lights of Dehradun below, those same lights as always, and breathed in the cold mountain air. For the first time in a long while, I felt a little more whole. Rohan didn't ask me to be his girlfriend. He simply kept showing up, which is a completely different thing, and one I only understood much later. We started meeting on Saturdays when he came back from Haridwar. First it was coffee, that simple thing of sitting at a table and talking. Then it became lunch. Then it became an entire afternoon. And one day, I realized I was looking forward to Saturday in a way I didn't look forward to any other day of the week. He knew I had separated. Sunita had told him the basics. But Rohan never asked for details, never pushed, never treated my story as a problem to be solved or an obstacle to overcome. He was simply there, on this side, present in a way I had forgotten existed. One afternoon, we were sitting on a bench near Robber's Cave, that place every Dehradun local has known since childhood. The sun was going down behind the mountains, that orange light the city gets in the late afternoon. And he said, without looking at me, that he thought I was a very strong person. I said I wasn't. He said that was exactly why he thought so. I didn't understand it at the time, but I kept it. With Rohan, I learned the difference between being chosen and being convenient. With Arvind, I had always been convenient. The wife who was there, who took care of things, who kept the house, who didn't complicate anything. I wasn't complaining about that at the time because I didn't know it was different from being chosen. I thought they were the same thing. Rohan chose me in a small and constant way that I didn't know existed. He chose to ask how my day had been and actually listen to the answer. He chose to remember things I had told him weeks before. He chose to arrive at the time we had agreed on. He chose to be honest when something bothered him instead of letting it build up. They were small things, but the small things are what build or destroy everything. My mother noticed before I had said anything. Mothers always notice. It is a skill of theirs that I never quite understood, but that works without fail. She looked at me one day while I was helping her in the kitchen and said, "You seem different." She didn't ask what was different. She just said I seemed different. And she kept looking at me with that mother's look that is half joy and half alertness, because she knew that different could be something good or something that was still going to cost me. I told her about Rohan that afternoon. She stayed quiet for a long time. Then she asked if he knew everything. About the marriage, about Arvind, all of it. I said he knew the essentials. She said, "Tell him everything. A man who finds out the truth later feels deceived even if you didn't deceive him in any way." I listened to my mother. That Saturday, I went and told Rohan everything, the full story. From the chai boiling in the kitchen to the voice notes, I stopped answering. I spoke without embellishing, without downplaying, without trying to seem braver or more broken than I actually was. He listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you for telling me." Just that, but it was everything that needed to be said. Nearly 2 years had passed since Arvind left when his messages stopped completely. I don't know exactly what happened on his end. Sometimes I imagined. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if he had found someone, if he had finally settled, if the visa problems had been resolved. But they were thoughts that came and went without holding me. They no longer carried the weight they once had. Life had become fuller. Rohan had moved to Dehradun permanently. The company had opened an office here, and he had requested the transfer. I know it was partly because of me, but he never used that as an argument, never framed it as a sacrifice, never let it become a debt between us. We were building something slowly, in the way you build when you have already learned that rushing in a relationship is related to recklessness. My sister Dia loved him. My father took a little longer, the way my father always takes longer with everything, but after a few months he started including Rohan in conversations as if he had always been part of the family. My mother made his favorite dish every time he came for dinner, which is the most direct love language my mother knows. I was happy, not in a loud way, in a quiet, solid way that felt different from anything I had felt before. It was on a Sunday morning, almost 3 years after Arvind had left, that his name appeared on my screen. It wasn't a message, it was a video call. I sat there staring at the ringing phone for too long. Rohan was in the kitchen making chai. I could hear the sound of the kettle, the familiar sound of that quiet Sunday. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a written message came. He said he needed to talk to me, that it was important, that please, if he called again, I should answer. I went to the kitchen, sat down, accepted the chai Rohan held out to me, and stayed quiet for a moment. He noticed. He asked if everything was all right. I told him Arvind had called. Rohan went quiet. He didn't get agitated, didn't get a closed expression, didn't ask a loaded question. He simply asked what I wanted to do. That question. What I wanted to do. Not what I should do. Not what would be right. Not what he thought I should do. What I wanted. I said I didn't know yet. He said, "That's fine. Take your time figuring it out." That week, Arvind tried 2 more times. On the third, I answered. The screen lit up and I saw a man I recognized but who seemed different. Older than the years should have made him. There was a paleness that Dehradun had never put on him. His eyes were sunken. Tired in a way I couldn't quite describe, but that I recognized, because it was the same tiredness I had seen in the mirror at certain moments over the past few years. He said, "Meher," just my name, but in the tone he used, a great deal was contained. I said, "Hi, Arvind." The conversation was strange in the way that conversations with someone who was once very close and has grown distant tend to be. There is a familiarity that no longer matches the actual distance. You know the voice, you know the gestures, but you no longer know what lies beneath. He asked how I was. I said I was fine. He asked about the family. I said everyone was fine. There was a silence. And then he said he was thinking about coming back to India. I said nothing. I waited. He said the United States hadn't been what he had imagined, that the first years had been much harder than anyone had told him, that the money he thought he would earn took far longer to appear than he had planned, that the loneliness there had a different weight. that he had gotten sick once and been alone in a room not knowing how to navigate the American healthcare system, with no one by his side. He kept talking, and I kept listening, and there was a part of me that felt all of it genuinely. Because no matter how much he had left me, I had not become a person who feels nothing for someone else's pain. But there was another part of me that was listening with a new clarity. The clarity of someone who has been through all the pain and come out the other side. Near the end of the call, he said something that stayed with me. He said he missed Dehradun, that he missed our home. That sometimes he woke up in the middle of the night in the Newark apartment and lay there thinking about how life had a different smell here, at this altitude, with this mountain cold. He said he missed me. I heard him. I didn't respond right away. I let that sentence sit in the air between his screen and mine. And then I said, with a calm that even surprised me, "I'm glad you're doing okay, Arvind." He went quiet. I said I needed to go, that we could talk more later if he wanted. I hung up. I sat there looking at the black screen for a moment. Then I got up, went to the bedroom window, looked at the mountains in the distance, those mountains that have always been here, that went nowhere, that are part of me in a way no other city ever could be. I heard Rohan's voice from the living room calling me for lunch. I took a deep breath, and I went. Arvind came back to Dehradun on a Thursday in October. I found out through my mother-in-law, who was no longer my mother-in-law, but who still called me from time to time with that voice of a woman carrying guilt she couldn't name. She called 2 days before, said he was coming back, said he wasn't doing well, said these things in a tone I recognized immediately. It was the tone of someone asking for something without the courage to ask directly. I said I was glad he was coming back to be near his family. I said it sincerely. I hung up without promising anything. I told Rohan that night. We were having dinner, that simple weeknight dinner, rice and lentils, and the television on low in the corner. I brought it up in the middle of the meal, without dramatizing, because with Rohan I had learned that things don't need a stage to be said. He listened. He asked how I was feeling. I thought honestly before answering. I said I was fine, that it was strange, but the kind of strange that doesn't hurt anymore, that it was more like finding an old piece of clothing at the back of the wardrobe. You recognize it, you remember it, but it no longer fits your body. Rohan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's a good way to describe it." We finished dinner, washed the dishes together, went to bed. Life continued in the simple and beautiful way it had become. Arvind reached out a week after arriving. He sent a message asking if I would be willing to meet for coffee. He said he wanted to talk, that there were things he needed to say, that he owed me that. I sat with the message on my screen for an entire day. I talked to Rohan. He said the same thing he always said. "What do you want to do?" I said I thought I should go. Not for him. For myself. Because there were 1 or 2 things I also needed to say. Things that had been stored away for years, that I had never had the proper chance to let out. Rohan said, "Then go. I'll be here when you get back." That sentence. So simple. So different from everything. We met at a cafe near the city center. A neutral place, public, with no memories between its walls. I arrived first. I sat there watching people pass by on the street outside, that Dehradun street I know by heart, and wondered for a moment how I had ended up here. 32 years old, divorced, rebuilt, sitting in a cafe waiting for the man who had left me to go live a better life. He walked in, and I noticed again what the phone screen had already shown me. He was different, not in a way that necessarily inspires pity, but in a way that shows life has collected something from you. His shoulders slightly rounded. The way he walked less hurried. That constant restlessness he had always carried was still there, but it had become smaller, more tired. He saw me, nodded, came to sit down. We ordered coffee, sat in silence for a moment. Then he started talking. He spoke in a way I had never heard him speak before, without pride woven through it, without that layer of a man who needs to seem in control. He said the first 2 years in the United States had been the hardest of his life, that the job his friend had promised lasted 4 months before the company closed, that he had gone almost 6 months without income, living with people he barely knew, eating poorly, sleeping in a room he shared with 2 others, that he had been sending money home pretending everything was fine because he couldn't bring himself to admit it had gone wrong. He said he had gotten sick in the second winter, a pneumonia he tried to ignore for weeks because he was afraid of the cost of a doctor, that when he finally went, he came out with a bill that took months to pay, that on that night in the hospital, alone, with a fever, not speaking their English well, with no one beside him, he had thought of me. He stopped. He looked down at his coffee. He said he had thought about me a lot. I listened to everything without interrupting. I let him finish. When he was done, We sat in silence for a moment. Then I spoke. Not with anger. There was no anger left. Anger is something that demands energy, and I had spent all my energy surviving, not storing anger. But I spoke with truth, which is different. I told him that while he was alone in that hospital, I was in Dehradun teaching class early in the morning and coming home in the dark and making dinner for myself and crying in the bathroom with the tap running so no one could hear. I told him that while he was discovering that life in the United States was harder than it looked, I was learning that I am stronger than I thought. Not because I wanted to learn that, because I was given no choice. I told him his pain was real, that I didn't doubt that, but that mine had been too. He kept his eyes on the table. He said he knew. He said it was the greatest regret of his life, that he had been a coward, that he had confused ambition with running away, that he had run from everything that was difficult, including me, and that out there he had discovered that difficulties don't stay behind when you board a plane. A different silence followed. Not uncomfortable, more like the silence after a storm passes. Then he said, "Are you okay now? Really?" I smiled. The first genuine smile since I had sat down. I said I was, that I had rebuilt everything, that I had someone by my side who treated me with the care I had always deserved, that I was happy in a way I didn't know existed before. He closed his eyes for a second. He said, "I'm glad. You deserve that." And I believed he was telling the truth. We stayed another 20 minutes or so. We talked about family, about Dehradun, about small things that cost nothing. When we stood up to leave, he said he hoped we could be people who greet each other on the street without heaviness. I said I hoped so too. We left through the same door and went in different directions. I walked slowly down the street, in that light October cold, the mountains on the horizon as always, and I felt that conversation settling inside me. Not like a scar, more like a story that had finally reached its last page. I called Rohan. He answered on the second ring. He asked how it had gone. I said, "It was necessary." He said, "Good. Do you want me to come pick you up?" I said no, that I preferred to walk for a bit. He said, "That's fine. See you at home." At home. That night, after dinner, while Rohan slept and I lay awake staring at the ceiling with that habit I had never quite managed to let go of, I thought about everything that story had cost me and everything it had given me. It had cost me 5 years. It had cost me a marriage, a version of the future I had imagined, a trust that took a very long time to come back. It had cost me nights and nights of crying in the dark and mornings of getting up when I didn't want to and entire days of pretending I was fine until I actually started to be. But it had given me other things. It had given me the certainty that I can, that when everything I thought I needed is taken away, I find a way. Not in a pretty way, not in the way that appears in redemption stories with music playing in the background. In a messy and exhausting and human way, which is the only real way there is. It had given me Dia calling in the middle of the night just to breathe together on the phone. It had given me my mother making chai without asking anything. It had given me the clarity to recognize a man who truly chooses me when he appeared in front of me. There is something nobody talks about when it comes to the women who stay behind when someone leaves in search of a better life. They talk about the man who left. They talk about the American dream. They talk about the courage it takes to leave everything behind. They frame it as ambition and sacrifice. But nobody talks about the woman who stayed, about how she also had courage, only her courage wasn't the courage to go. It was the courage to continue. It was the courage to get up in the morning when she didn't want to smile for her students when she was destroyed inside, to not let the pain turn into bitterness, to start over without anyone applauding, without a plane ticket, without a redemption story to tell. She stayed here, in the same city, on the same streets, and rebuilt everything quietly, beneath the surface, without waiting for anyone to notice. I was that woman, and it took me a very long time to understand that this too is a form of courage, perhaps the most difficult kind of all. Weeks after that coffee, the mother-in-law who was no longer my mother-in-law called again. This time her voice was different. The embarrassment was gone. There was something closer to gratitude, or resolved shame. I'm not entirely sure. She said Arvind had told the family what had really happened. Not the edited version he had been telling for years. The real version. The hardships, the isolation, the months without work, the night in the hospital. She said the family had been in shock, that they had imagined a very different life out there from what it had actually been, that he had protected his pride for so long that no one had known the truth. And then she said something I wasn't expecting. She said, "He also told them what he did to you, how it was. He asked me to apologize to you on his behalf. I stayed silent." She said, "I should have called sooner. I should have been on your side. I was a coward too. I don't know what she expected me to say. Perhaps absolution. Perhaps anger. Perhaps anything that would resolve the weight she had been carrying. I told her I understood. That I was fine. That I was moving forward. I hung up. I sat there for a moment with the phone in my hand. And I realized I was telling the truth. This morning I woke up to the sun coming through the bedroom window and the sound of the city outside beginning its day. Dehradun waking up the way it always wakes up, with that calm of a mountain city that never quite understood the point of rushing. Rohan was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his phone. That morning habit of his that mildly irritates me, and that I secretly find one of the most familiar and beautiful things in my life now. I lay there for a moment just looking at the ceiling. I thought about Arvind in Newark in a past winter, alone in a shared room, trying to make dal that turned out a disaster. I thought about him now here in Dehradun, starting over from scratch on this side, discovering that the place he had wanted to leave behind was perhaps the place he had always needed. I thought about myself at 30, on the balcony, hearing that my marriage was over. I thought about myself now. I got up. I went to make chai. And as the steam rose in the cold morning air, a clarity came to me that is difficult to explain, but that I will try. Life was not fair to me in those years. It wasn't. I lost things I should never have lost. I carried pain that was not mine to carry. I stayed silent when I should have shouted. I smiled when I was destroyed. I kept moving forward when I could barely stay standing. But here I am. Here I am with my chai, with my mountains, with a man who chooses me every day without needing a stage to do it, with my family who stayed, with a strength I didn't know I had until I was forced to find it. Here I am. And that, I discovered, is everything. Sometimes I think about the women who are right now where I once was, waiting, surviving, rebuilding in silence. I want them to know one thing that took me years to learn. The life you will build after the pain can be bigger than the one you lost. Not better in the sense of easier, bigger in the sense of more yours, more honest, more solid, built with your own hands in your own time, according to what you actually need and not according to someone else's dream. Nobody is going to give that to you. You will have to go find it on your own. But you can. I know because I did.